Welcome to the first ever podcast for Convention of States, Ohio. My name is Diana Tellis. I am the Ohio State Communication Coordinator for Convention of States, and I have been with Convention of States about 3 years. And we're launching our very first podcast, and I'm excited to have a couple of guests here. Bill Scott, our State Director, Ohio Convention of States State Director, and Jeremiah Campana. Jeremiah has his own podcast called The Anatomy of the Church and State. And I'd like each of you, if you don't mind, introduce yourselves, and then we'll move on to our two topics for tonight. Bill?
Well, as you said, I am the state director for Convention of States here in Ohio. I've been with the organization a little over 6 years now. And my background, as you mentioned, is in finance. I am retired. I spent about 40 years working in public accounting as a partner in a CPA firm, international, and later in industry as a chief financial officer of several insurance companies. And so that is why Convention of States is of interest to me, because they want to do something about the federal debt.
Where am I?
Yeah, Jeremiah Campana, like you said, I host a podcast, Anatomy of the Church and State. And the goal of my podcast is to help Christians navigate, make sense of, and change our cultural political landscape. Stumbled across Convention of States a little while ago, and a big supporter of what you guys are doing. I'm a big fan of all options on the table, and I think this Article 5 is a great option.
Great, thank you. Jeremiah, you just did a really nice podcast with our founder, Mark Meckler, and I want to make sure we get a plug in for that and for your podcast in general. But that has already been posted to your site. Can you tell us where do they find that? What website can they find that on, Mark Meckler?
Yeah, you can either find me on Rumble, Anatomy of the Church and State. My username is Jesus and Liberty, because I love Jesus, I love liberty. And you can also find that on my website. So if you don't like Rumble, I know Rumble is a relatively new YouTube competitor. So the user friendliness of it is still getting there. It's a great platform, though. But if you don't want to watch me on Rumble, you can find it at christiansforliberty.com. That's the number 4, christiansforliberty.com.
Great. Well, thank you both for being here tonight. Really do appreciate it. And I want to give a little quick plug in for my my son, Matt, who is in the background here as a producer. I don't think he's going to pop his face in. That's okay. But I wanted to give him some credit. He's a senior in high school. He's already taken college classes. He's very busy and has always been really willing to run to my rescue every time I need technical help. And when I had something like this that I wanted to do, there he is. Good to see you. And my kitchen for Convention of States. So I appreciate his involvement here today. That's been, it's really good to have him. So as our first episode, I wanted to cover Article 5 and give a little overview of what Article 5 is. And then after we talk about that, I'll talk about one of the 3 pillars that our Article 5 movement is looking to address: fiscal responsibility and holding the federal government accountable to fiscal responsibility, that we can do that with a convention. But let's start what that means. I sometimes think that we throw it around, but let's explain how Article 5 works. Article 5, I mean, really basic stuff here. There are 7 articles of the Constitution. Article 5 of those 7 is really pretty much entirely dedicated to amendments to the Constitution. There's a first clause of Article 5 that allows for amendments to the Constitution as proposed by Congress. When they are proposed by Congress, they do still have to go out to the states to be ratified. A supermajority of the states have to vote in favor of any amendment that's proposed. As we know, that has only been done 37 times. And that's not very many, because there's been a lot of proposals over the years. There's 11,000 proposals, amendment proposals. I just found that fact out, a lot of them. It's in my my testimony, actually. And only 37 have been ratified. So
27.
I'm sorry, 27. Thanks, Bill. Yeah. What most people don't know about is the second clause of Article 5 allows for the states to propose amendment to the Constitution. Now, in order to do that, Article 5 states, and I have it right here. I'm thinking I might read Article 5 out loud. I'm worried that it might take up too much time, but I think it's important language to review. It would, if 34 states agree to host a convention, then the states can convene, discuss amendments, write them, and propose them, and shell those out back to the states for ratification. And that would take 38 votes to do that. It's a pretty tall order, honestly, which is why there's only been 27 so far. But that's how it works. I don't know. Do you think I should read Article 5? I've got it right here. I won't read every single word of it, but it does say, the Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution, not a brand new one, or on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states, shall call a convention for proposing amendments, which in either case shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of this Constitution when ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states or by the conventions in 3/4 thereof. I hope I didn't miss a line there. So what may be difficult for people to understand, and I would know this because I am fielding comments on Facebook a lot where people will misunderstand and tell me, they'll say things like, oh, and you thought that, they couldn't talk about, guns with an Article 5 convention. No, our movement, we wouldn't talk about, any of the Bill of Rights, none of them, not the first 10 amendments. We wouldn't do that in Ohio. We wouldn't do that. And that's not one of our 3 pillars. It just isn't. Our 3 pillars of our convention movement are fiscal restraint on the federal government, to curtail government overreach, and to initiate term limits on Congress and all federal offices. Those are the 3 things that are specific to the resolution that describes this convention of state movement. So, Bill, did I miss anything? Did I do okay there?
No, I think you did great, Diana.
I haven't had an event in a while, so I haven't. When we have a lot of events going on out there, I get really, really good at talking the talk, and it's been a little while. So I'll ask Bill first here. Since you've been with COS the longest, Jeremiah is rather new. Bill's been at it, I don't know, how many years did you say?
6 years.
That's a long time. Explain in your words how this works and what platform separates the Convention of States organization with any other Article 5 effort that is out there right now.
Yeah. Well, I think you gave a good overview, Diana, that it's basically a meeting of the states. It's not a constitutional convention or a con, as some of our opponents speak in pejorative terms, say you're holding a new constitutional convention. It's a meeting of state legislatures, not unlike what happens in Columbus every day or any other state capital. Legislators know how to run meetings, so that once 34 states, as you said, have called for this convention, we have 19 so far, then they have the meeting and they have Robert's Rules of Order, some other way of running the meeting that's not unfamiliar to them, and they debate those 3 topic areas that you suggested. Now, those 3 topic areas work hand in glove with each other. One of the things you asked me was, how is this different? We are not the only Article 5 movement out there. We are the biggest, the most organized, and the one that we believe will be successful. But there are other Article 5 movements, such as the Balanced Budget Amendment, which has been out there for a while, and some other groups that have done this. But we like our approach because of the 3 platforms. They work hand in glove together. If you just did a Balanced Budget Amendment, that's great. That would be a start. I'd like it. But it's not enough because we have such systemic problems. Washington is broken. And just saying you got to balance the budget isn't the answer. You've got to give them the tools to balance the budget. And that means you've got to have the wherewithal to rein in the administrative state, which is who decides, the policies that guide our government. Is it the DC bureaucrats, or is it the folks that send them there from the states and so forth? And then also term limits. We're not going to get the 90-year-old gerontology group trying to balance the budget. So I like our approach with the 3 platforms because they basically are the toolbox that our people need in order to bring some sanity back to federalism, to make the government in the DC area not be a super Goliath the way it is now, and be just one part of a state, federal, and local system that balance and check each other. So that's why I think our approach will be successful.
Very good.
I had no idea that there was other movements out there.
Yes.
Is it because of the three pillars you think that it kind of overshadows the other ones that are out there? And is the reason that there's no collaboration, or is there collaboration amongst?
That's a good question.
And it is a good question. And there is not a formal collaboration. We support the balanced budget people. The balanced budget people support us, but they're doing their thing. We're doing our thing. And we just hope that our method is the one that ultimately is successful. But we can't delude ourselves by saying, okay, we'll just throw in with the balanced budget folks and dilute our effort. That's not what we're going to do.
And they're passed by resolution. The way the states proclaim, yeah, we're in, is by resolution, and the resolutions would have to aggregate, and ours would not aggregate with another organizations because they just don't read the same. The language isn't similar enough.
Very good point. That we
discussed, but
taking great pains, the organization, when they put this together, to make sure that each state passes nearly identical resolutions that will, quote, aggregate, meaning that they can't throw it out when we present the resolutions to Washington, to the archivist or whoever reviews it. Some of the other groups may have that issue because they've been at it longer. They've been at it sort of haphazardly, start and stop. And I don't think they will be quite as tidy as we are in our approach.
Well, yeah, if I'm one of them, sorry, I don't mean to hijack the conversation here, but if I'm one of them, I'm like, if I'm doing a haphazard job, I'm like, well, let me just throw in with let me just change my whole thing and throw in with the people who are successful and just make this movement bigger. That's what I mean, personally, that just makes sense to me.
Yeah, well, of course, they don't think they're haphazard. I don't mean to denigrate them, but there is some risk to other groups that may not aggregate. They don't think so. They may be willing to roll the dice and take their chances in court if they have to litigate it. The problem is if you have to litigate something, you're going to lose years in the process. We don't want to lose years in the process of getting to 34 states. And that's why we're very careful about our approach.
Nice.
Yeah. But it's an interesting point that anybody could really, if you had some backing and a good spokespeople and probably some financial good financial backing, you could start, an Article 5 movement. It sits on the Constitution. It's a tool that's available. It doesn't say it's a lobbying effort with the states is what it is. And they don't do it on their own that I've ever heard of so they have to be sort of prodded. So that's who we are. This is a great conversation. I'm glad that we went there with that. Jeremiah. So, you're newly a volunteer helping with our podcast, which is very much appreciated. Jeremiah, if I didn't say this already, is going to just kind of guest host with me as often as I can get him to. And we really appreciate having him. He's pretty experienced at it, and I like his style for sure. So you've been drawn in to the movement or to the Convention of States effort. And what drew you to the effort? And how did you learn about the Article 5 movement, the Convention of States movement? How specifically did you learn about that, about us?
Oh, well, what's crazy is I randomly stumbled across you guys, and I want to say it's because I took a Rick Green biblical citizenship class.
That'll do it.
I ended up on someone's mailing list somewhere that sent me an email.
Yeah.
So that piqued my interest. And then when at first I was just kind of like looking at what you guys were doing. I had no intentions of volunteering at all. And then you guys got involved with issue 1 here in Ohio. And you were doing something. You were making moves. And when I filled out the volunteer thing, like you guys responded right away and got me involved right away. So I'm like, hey, I'm ready to volunteer. I'm ready to do something. And you guys were the only ones that reached out. And I'm glad you did because I'm learning a lot. about the whole process. Like you mentioned earlier, I interviewed Mark Meckler, super down to earth
Yeah.
dude, just strong brother in Christ, and his passion rubs off when just talking to him, and you could tell he's got the fire. And I'm like I said, I'm a huge believer of attacking this from all angles, whatever
Yeah.
works. The situation is
Mhm.
getting dire more
is
and more every year. Like I'm like, as we move closer to November, I'm terrified of what's going to happen in this country. So this is like kind of like a nuclear bomb like attack here, and I love it, and I think it could definitely work.
Mhm.
If I could just say one quick story anecdotally to build on what Jeremiah said about our response and how he got involved and the fact that we jumped on him right away. Um, do you know who Pete Hegseth is, Jeremiah? Fox? No, he's a Fox and Friends host on the weekend. A very good one. He's also one of our endorsers. If you look on our webpage, you can see him. He is he loves to tell the story. He told it to us a couple of years ago when we met nationally as a group, that before he got involved with us, he liked what we're doing, as you do. He liked our platform, and he thought it's a great solution. But does he want to get involved with us? He said, all right, I'm going to try an experiment. So he wrote in, didn't say who he was or what he represents or anything. He just wrote into the info at cosaction.com, the general, like a general mailbox, and said, I might want to get involved. What can you tell me? And he got a call back within a day, and they were give him all the information. And it wasn't because they knew who Pete Hegseth was. It was just because we have a process in place to make sure people are responded to. And then, of course, quickly it was realized, oh, okay, this is a guy with a national platform, and it's been a wonderful relationship with Pete Hegseth.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, you guys got a great staff. I'll tell you that.
Well, I feel a little guilty because that's one of the things I have a tough time with is when I've got names of volunteers, I have a hard time getting the calls all in. So I kudos to our grassroots coordinators and whoever it is that's well, a lot of people are in there, and our RCs are looking, and we have a hierarchy of folks that would have access to new volunteers. And as long as it gets sent to the right person and that person then makes their call, I guess that's how I got your name. Actually, that was through Amy. So yeah, it works. It does work. And but it's very hard as a volunteer with Convention Estates. We do a lot of work, and I probably am the one who has the toughest time with follow up. But we're glad to have you. We're glad to have you. So thanks for that overview, gentlemen. That was great. So now I'd like to move on to one of our pillars, the one that worries me of the three. Gosh, they all worry me. They all worry me, but fiscal worries me a lot. And it's a serious, serious matter. And it is not just as simple as saying, look, we've been talking about the national debt since I was a kid in the 70s, 80s, the national debt has been talked about. And I said, well, I'll start with this. The debt clock, when I wrote my notes for this, was 33 trillion. And Bill, I'm going to start with you since you're the money guy. Why is that happening? And what exactly is the bulk of that? What's the bulk of that? Where's that coming from? What happened?
Well, it's coming from your kids, your grandkids, and your great grandkids. That's where it's gonna come from.
Yeah, right. But how did it get there?
I want to say, first of all, that I know your notes were done a little while ago, but it's not 33 trillion, it's 34 trillion as of January 1st. And so we're up another $1 trillion just in the last 100+ days. At the start of the NFL football season, we were at 33 trillion, as you said. So in a little over 100 days, another trillion has been added with profligate federal spending. But, how do we get there? I mean, it's just grown because we have not had a federal budget passed by our Congress, which is their duty. They're supposed to pass an annual budget. Just responsible since 1996. So we've gone, how many years is that? Almost 30 years, 28 years with no balance, or not a balanced budget, no budget, which means that they just spend and spend and spend. And because the Federal Reserve allows them to spend money they don't have. They just print it. So anytime that the politicians want to reward a special interest group, big donors, or a voting bloc in their states, they create a new program, they create something, and they give money away, and it's not their money. And that's why the thing continues to explode. We should be paying our debt down. We should be living within our means. We should not be running up this debt, because it only is allowed to be a debt because we are the world's reserve currency for a number of decades now. And that means that we have the ability to, quote, print money with nothing behind it. There's not a gold reserve sitting there or something of value to say, oh, I'm good for this 34 trillion. It's simply you, me, and our kids, the full faith and credit of the federal government. That really means the ability of its citizens to be productive and produce things in the future that brings revenue in. That means there'll always be a money source to pay it off. That was the theory. That theory is really got cracks in it now. So there are many saying that there's no way we can ever pay that 34 trillion off as it is, and it could be 50 trillion in another 10 years. So we got to do something, because the thing that will happen is, it's already starting to happen. Have you ever heard the term BRICS nations? You know what a BRICS nation is? Okay. Well, BRICS is, it stands for, it's a bunch of countries that are starting to do something that we're not doing, which is they're trying to address the world currency markets and the world monetary systems. And they're saying we got to go into de-dollarization mode, meaning that we can't rely on the US dollar anymore to be that store of value, that current situation, the gold standard, if you will, even though there's no gold behind it. We have to have our own currency, maybe. So these BRICS nations, stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and now the S part of it is, I think, Saudi Arabia. It used to be just BRIC. Now I think it's BRICS, plural, Saudi Arabia. These folks are saying, let's get a petrodollar independent of the US dollar and settle our international debts with something other than the US dollar. And it can happen. And it's actually happening in pockets now. So if that ever takes off big time, and we're in a world of hurt, because that means that not only can't we print money anymore, but we'll have no way to pay that debt back, because nobody will want to buy our bonds. Right now, other governments buy it, individuals buy it, corporations buy it. But you don't want to buy a bond of, an organization that can't pay its existing debts. So that's kind of why it's a big deal. And those companies or those BRIC nations are also buying a ton of gold for their coffers. It doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to back it by gold, but they're going to have the ability to say, we have some financial resources to back, our trading settlement, whether it's a petrodollar or whether it's a BRICS dollar or whatever it is. So that's kind of a long-winded way, but to say, yes, this is very serious, and it's going to affect your standard of living of your kids, your grandkids. It's not going to affect my standard of living, but I still probably feel that I know it's going to affect my kids' living standard and my grandkids. So that's the big way it's going to affect.
Jeremiah,
it will be lower.
Yeah, but no, I'm glad you brought up gold. How much did getting off the gold standard play into this massive debt, do you think?
Good question.
If any?
Yeah. Well, that happened in 1971. And a lot of people don't know, but I just learned this myself actually a couple of weeks ago, is that it was President Nixon was the one who took us off the gold. It wasn't the gold standard, it was the gold convertibility. The convertibility of the US dollar into gold happened in 1971. And it was in reaction to some events happening in the world about a possible run on gold and some inflationary things. And they always thought it was going to be a temporary thing. So what people don't realize is that was an executive order of President Nixon. It was not an act of Congress. It was not a amendment to the Constitution. It was not it's something that, just like any other executive order, someday could be repealed. But here it is, more than 50 years later, and we're still on that executive order. So, we have to do something to build confidence in the world that America can address her and our fiscal responsibility. And right now, we're not doing it. It's very disappointing what I've seen this last couple of days in Congress with our new speaker, playing with very, very small amounts that he claims are cuts to the budget. It's just not enough. So.
I agree.
So after that broad overview there, Jeremiah, back into your sort of in your personal life, how do you feel the debt? Does you feel it affects you or your family, your livelihood, your industry that you work in? Do you feel that? And this will help me segue into my next question for Bill. What do you notice? I mean, I guess you could blame the economy, but do you feel like the debt has an effect on you?
I mean, yeah, we're feeling it as a family, and the industry. Bill, you mentioned you were in insurance. That's my current 9 to 5. I work in the insurance industry, and it's reeling right now. Good luck being a salesman in the insurance industry right now. And we just bought our first house not too long ago. Me and my wife. The cost of everything is just. We bought in during the pandemic in 2020. And just a few short years later, here we are like, oh, wow, we might have to move to a more economically sound within downsize, so to speak, move out of the city of Columbus and go far, far out into the rural areas, which, at this point, I'd welcome a rural area because Columbus is just getting insane. But when we first bought this house, everything was great. And you could just, as the years have rolled on, just the taxes are going up like crazy. The grocery bills going up like crazy. They reappraised everyone's houses in these areas, and just the cost of living is just insane. It's just insane.
Mm-hmm. Well, that leads into my next question, Bill. You and I talked about this a few days ago. What is it that we know the economy isn't good, but as far as the debt specifically, but government spending and the inflation and all that, all of it factors in. I'm focusing on the debt, but it's everything. What is it that does the next generation, like, well, my kids they won't know what they don't know. They won't recognize that there are businesses that never launched 5 years ago to grow and expand and serve the community. The mom and pops don't make it when things are this tight and when taxes are so high and when there isn't an economy conducive to new growth. So I don't know, from your perspective, what don't we know? What don't we have because we're so far in debt and because our government is just printing and printing and spending. What else don't we know? I see a lack of business growth. What else is there that my kids may never even recognize because they won't know?
Yeah. We say that we want to be self-governing citizens in convention states. We're not just about passing a resolution. That's our near-term goal. But longer term, we want to be a citizen or a nation of citizen-led activists to keep our government accountable. And that's what they may not know. They may not know what independence is, what freedom is, what liberty is, what things we love about our founding documents. And because we're going to be debt slaves, or they're going to be debt slaves. The standard of living, as I mentioned, going down. They won't know about the fact that maybe they could take a risk as a young person in their 20s and start a business. And okay, if I fail, I'll start another one. I'll learn from that or whatnot. They may not get that chance because nobody's going to loan them money these days. Banks are so scared right now to make a risky loan. Back when we were really cranking on all 8 cylinders as a country, your local community bank would give a guy a chance in the community that they knew because it was the thing to do. And I don't think you'll see those kinds of opportunities now. So lack of business formation, lack of ability to know that the freedoms that you had 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago are sort of dissipating now. And that's all because we've become debt slaves, trying to, run hamsters on a wheel, as they say, trying to get that debt paid off. And that's not good. And then
No, they're
again,
breeding
losing,
it's like they're breeding whole generations to not know what being an entrepreneur is.
exactly right. And that's what made America great. And we made things here ourselves in the last 40 years or 50 years. More recently, 30 years, Wall Street decided to financial engineer these companies and say, you could save 8% if you ship it all to China. And we've lost our basic industries. We're trying to get it back now, but it's going to be a long time getting that ability to have it back in. But we need to do that.
Well, a convention of the states, a state amending convention, can make some real change here. If they couldn't, I'd be volunteering for something else. One of my favorite lines is, if there were something better out there for me to be volunteering at, I would be doing it, because I really wanted to help the country, and I wanted to help get it back on track. And I found nothing more effective than this. So a state amending convention can address the fiscal problems in this country, among other things, but since we're focusing on fiscal right now. Jeremiah, I know you know that. I'll quiz you and see. I know you're new-ish, but have you thought through fiscal amendment, an amendment that could address fiscal responsibility that maybe you've read, maybe you haven't? It's okay if you haven't, but have you considered an amendment out there that you'd like to see passed that would address fiscal responsibility in the federal government? I have a favorite. Let me go first. I'll go first. Well, I would like to see the income tax capped at maybe a 15%, just because that's what I read, and that's what's in the Liberty Amendments book by Mark Levin, and that sounds good to me. I don't see it going down to zero. 15% allows them to take care of the Smithsonian's and the federal offices and the military. And I don't know what else, and very little else, honestly. And I know the states will tax us like crazy. And I think I'm okay with that, actually, for the moment, until we have to rein them into. But I want the states to keep the money that's theirs, and keep it, and fix the bridges and fix the roads and fix the schools. And I think we would be a lot more responsible closer to home with that money. So that would be my favorite. I know I'm putting you on the spot, Jeremiah. If you don't have an amendment in mind, that's okay. But
I think my anti-tax sentiments are a little more extreme than what you guys might be used to. But I'm a Ron Paul guy, so I would love to abolish the Federal Reserve. That would be a great amendment. Get rid of the Federal Reserve.
I've not heard that one yet.
Yeah.
Bill, what do you got in mind for your favorite?
Well, since you brought it up,
there it is.
There we are. Mark Levin, my 2013. So it's over 10 years old now. I read it, and actually that's the reason I'm at Convention States today, because I'm a Mark Levin fan. But his book had a number of proposed amendments, and he had two that dealt with fiscal matters. The one was for spending, and one was for taxes. And you already touched on the taxes one, Diana. But for spending, he had an interesting proposal that if Congress, as you mentioned, or as I mentioned earlier, we haven't had a budget since 1996, a true, debated, so forth, passed budget since 96. Under Levin's proposal, if that happens, if we didn't pass a budget, the very first day of the new fiscal year, we would have a 5% across the board cut in every single federal department and budget versus the previous budget. So that's a meat axe approach, but it's a way to enforce that we're serious about having a budget. He also said no more than 17.5% of the gross domestic product can be for expenditure. So in other words, he's finding a way to cut down the excessive spending by saying, look at what you're producing. If you produce an economy that's $20 trillion, then take 17.5% of that, and that's what you can spend as a federal government on your various programs. So as the economy shrinks, if you have a problem, if you're not producing enough or you're outsourcing to China too much, you're going to shrink your GDP, and therefore your 17.5% federal expenditures also need to shrink. So that's a pretty interesting concept. He provides some safety valves, if you will, that to maybe deficit spend a little bit if we have a war or something like that, and you suspend that 17.5% for 1 year if you get 3/5 of the Congress, House and Senate, to agree. But again, only for 1 year for an unusual circumstance. So I like that. On the spending side, you already mentioned he proposed 15% tax on up to 15%, and no estate taxes and no other personal type of taxes at all. So they're not going to make it up in other taxes. So that's Levin's kind of overview of his thing. But I also like some of the proposals that came out of our simulation that was in Williamsburg this past summer. Our state legislatures went down there for a long weekend, actually 2 days only, and debated a number of proposals. And where's I have it here somewhere? Yeah, they produced a paper with some proposals for all three planks of our resolution. And the one that I like that they came up with was similar to Levin. They had a way to bring in the spending by saying that you take the average of the last 3 years, what your revenues collected were, and you can't exceed the average of those last 3-year revenues for expenditures. So that's a way, again, of balancing. If you want to spend a whole lot on social programs or whatnot, you better have the revenues to support them. Mm-hmm. And I like the fact that they averaged the last 3 years, because some year could be a blip and whatever, and, you know, COVID or that kind of stuff. So that was one of my favorites as well.
And for the record, the balanced budget is one of the amendments we would obviously could come out of a convention that we would host. That's not off the table just because somebody else has proposed that.
Oh no, it's you know, balanced budget is kind of a, you know, that it's a very simple concept, but it's the way you implement it is all the, it's in devil's in the details, as they say. Are you going to balance a budget by raising taxes? That's one way you can balance a budget. You know, you got to have a lot of caveats in there.
And the second part of that, if I remember, is that they would be held to the accounting standards that any other organization would be accountable to, right, Bill? What is that called?
Yeah, I think that's called generally accepted accounting principles. I don't know if they actually had that. I think they did discuss it. You know, we're basically a cash basis country. We run our books the same way the corner dry cleaner might, you know, cash in, cash out. But U.S. corporations, they account for all their liabilities, whether they're real cash today or not. For instance, all the Social Security, Medicare, and all those promises, they're promises. So the fact that I will be collecting my Medicare and my Social Security for another, hopefully 20, 30 years, that's a cost today that hasn't actually been spent, but the promise has been made. So if the government was a corporation, they would have a liability on their books for those future payments back to present value. So that's a good way to get
gift cards. The gift cards that they have millions of dollars worth of gift cards. That's a liability, right?
Exactly. Yes, that's
right.
Exactly right.
So unfunded liabilities, like
unfunded liabilities, which
you
know, we talked about earlier that the federal deficit right now is 34 trillion. Well, that's the easy cash basis number. That's kind of like money in, money out. We're short 34 trillion. If you add those unfunded liabilities that we were just talking about, that number is huge. It's anywhere from 150 to 200 trillion dollars in future promises that I said your kids, your great grandkids are somehow going to have to pay that back because the promises were made.
That's wild.
We need to have a state convention, and we need to get 30 to 34 states. We need to do this.
Yeah. I got a question for you, Bill. So what happens if what's the worst case, like doomsday scenario? We default on this loan. We just don't pay it. What happens?
Well, yeah, it probably will not come to a technical default, like a company or a bank that defaults, and what will happen is our bettors in Washington will crank up the inflation machine, and they will inflate away our debt, so they're paying back that debt with cheaper dollars.
Mm.
It's a gimmick, and it's wrong. But think Argentina many years ago. Your dollar is worth $1 today. It's not worth the same dollar it was 20 years ago. But if we have to pay off this $34 trillion, and they can pay it off with a dollar that's worth a whole lot less by printing more of them, that's the way they don't have a technical default. But in essence, it is a default if you have to print it.
It's a disaster.
Yeah, it's a disaster. We don't want to be Argentina. And
No.
I mean, that could happen. It could happen if all of a sudden these BRICS nations, or it really catches on, and we do lose our reserve currency status. People don't want to have dollars anymore. We could end up with spiraling inflation that makes today's inflation look tame. Like in Germany in the 1930s, they're taking wheelbarrows of cash to get a loaf of bread. It's I don't want to be scary about it, but that's.
No, we do want to be scary about it. I want it to be today, because I want to build a case for us doing this and why we're here.
Well, we need to fire people up too. I feel like still too many people. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Still too many people are lazy and apathetic. It's like, let's go, people. Like, the situation's dire.
Well, they're so frustrated. It's easy to just turn your head and say, I can't do anything about this. I just can't deal with it. And that is hard. It is hard to go to bed on this when you understand it. But either that, or we do nothing, or we pretend like it's not happening. And I'm not going to do that. And that's why Convention of States is here doing what it's doing. And it's a joy to work beside both of you and all the other volunteers in COS that I interact with every day, because they get it, and getting it is a very, very big deal. And there's no other way past it, unless we all understand it and recognize where the tools are to fix it. So that's all I have for tonight, gentlemen. It was a pleasure talking. I could talk about COS all day long. And, I'd like to, but I probably should wrap this up, and we'll see how well we did for our first podcast. It's been fun.
Thank you, Diana.
So, thanks for being here. I'd like to make one more plug for Jeremiah's podcast, Anatomy of the Church and State. That's the name of the podcast. And you can find that on Rumble. And let me see, Jesus and Liberty on X, and I'll let him correct.
It's Jesus and Liberty on all social media. I'm not on Facebook though. And I'm only posting clips on YouTube. You can find me on YouTube, but it's only the clips. I'm trying to push towards that parallel economy, and get
very
competitors.
Good, right? We agree. Yeah.
Yep.
And okay, perfect. And then the Meckler interview is up there. I will post that to Facebook, actually. And then on the Convention of States Ohio Facebook page. So if you're listening and you're brand new to COS, please like our Facebook page. We would appreciate that. We need all the followers we can get, and to spread the messages that we put out on there would be a gift for us. It'd be very helpful. And anybody out there that is interested in volunteering for COS, or even just to learn more, www.conventionofstates.com. And if you really want to get in quick, my email is Diana, Diana.Tellis, TELLES, at cosaction.com. And I promise I will take very good care of anybody who reaches out to me directly. I will work it out and will respond, I promise. And thank you, anybody out there that's listening. We do appreciate it very much.